Hi guys, my name is Roger, and ever since I was a teenager, I've always wanted to build my own car. I started this channel to see if an average person, like me, can design and build their own mid-engine car. If you like what you see here in my videos, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you know someone who you think might be interested in my videos, please share the videos with them. If you have the means and would like to donate to help complete this car, there's a link below to my Patreon account. If not, just watch and enjoy the videos. I'll be adding a new video every week, and with that out of the way, let's get started with this week's video.
We're starting here on the frame of the car. This is the cabin area, which consists of 4 tubes, 2 larger tubes on the sides for crash protection, and 2 smaller tubes spanning between the large tubes. These smaller tubes are where the seat frames and seat belts will attach to, and they're also support for the floor of the car. I'm tack welding these 4 pieces of tubing together. You'll see me repeatedly checking, measuring for squareness, hold everything in position like I want it while I'm tack welding, and until I do the final welding, I'll keep everything clamped to the table while I'm welding until the weld's cool to try to keep everything as square as possible. Continuing to measure, check for squareness. As the old saying goes, measure twice, cut once. Just verifying that everything is staying in position. These tubes, the larger tubes, are 3 inches by 6 inches and 3/16 wall. The 2 smaller tubes are 2-inch square and 3/16 wall. The 3 airplanes you see hanging on the wall are electric-powered, foam, radio-controlled airplanes that I used to fly. They've actually been hanging on that wall for probably 10 or 12 years and haven't been flown. But if the batteries are still good, I'm sure they would everything would work fine with them. I am new to TIG welding, so you'll see me stop and pull the tungsten out of the handset and clean it pretty regularly. Still bad to dip it into the puddle or touch it with a welding rod. And these 4 pieces are welded together, just getting a visual reference, making sure everything is parallel and square.
Okay guys, I wanted to stop and take a minute here and show you the first small component that's completed. Just finished welding these 4 tubes together. This is actually the floor for the cockpit of the car. The larger tubes here on the sides are the side rails that run from front to rear. They are the largest tubes for crash protection and strength in this cockpit area. The 2 smaller tubes, the 2-inch square tubes, are the tubes that span widthways across, and that is where the seat brackets will attach to and seat belts. Just kind of give you a quick overview here of this component, and we will move on and start welding the next major component.
Okay, now we're on to our second weldment. This is actually what the engine will attach to. It is the lower rear section of the frame. If you are new to TIG welding aluminum, you'll need to use a stainless steel brush to clean the aluminum before you weld. Aluminum has an oxide coating on it, and it needs to be very clean before you start welding to get the best quality welds. These small assemblies you see me working on now go on the firewall. They're the vertical pieces on each side of the firewall where the upper rear frame attaches to. And just to the bottom of the video there, you can see those 2 large wooden 90-degree angles that I made just to make sure everything stays square. They're easy to put in place, and they have these slots on each side for the clamps to clamp it into position to hold things square. You'll see me sit down and look like I'm resting or thinking. Quite often I'm planning ahead, trying to come up with the best procedure to assemble things so I don't paint myself into a corner. The tubing I'm using here is 2-inch by 4-inch, and the long tubes that are running front to rear on the car are 3/16 wall. These suspension components will be attaching to these, so I wanted to use a thicker wall tubing for strength. The smaller length tubes that span between these 2 tubes are 2 different sizes, 2 by 4 and 1.5 by 3. and they are both 1/8 wall tubing, since they're just going to be in compression. This is the second of the vertical assemblies that mount on the firewall. You'll see here in just a few minutes I'll attach these to the motor assembly there setting in the floor that I just finished welding. And we're welding again. The assembly, all the pieces are clamped to the table to hold them in position so they can't move while I'm doing the final welding. Thinking again, planning, trying to figure out what's the next step. I was missing one tube, one span tube here between these vertical tubes, so I had to cut a quick tube out. Here you'll see I am welding small caps, 2" by 4" caps on the ends of the tubes, trying to cover all the open ends of the tubes in the assembly as I go, so there's no place for water or anything to get up inside of these tubes to cause corrosion. And here we're taking the two vertical pieces that I just welded up and attaching them to this lower rear frame section where the motor mounts. I'm setting everything up on aluminum blocks here just because there's welds underneath these tubes and the welds won't sit flush on the table and stay square. So I'm propping everything up on these aluminum blocks, the 2-inch by 4-inch blocks, just to keep everything perfectly square, and then I'll clamp it out to the table so nothing can move. I'm filing and sanding on these pieces to get them to fit exactly perfect up against the other tubes. Here you'll see me using those large wood 90s to making sure everything is perfectly 90 degrees. I was happy with the fit of the vertical assembly on the left, so I went ahead and tacked it into position. I was having some trouble getting the right side assembly exactly where I wanted it. It just wouldn't line up perfect. So eventually I decided to go ahead and weld the left side assembly permanent, and then I could use that to clamp a support to and come back and get this right side assembly exactly the way I needed it to be. That's where I got frustrated and gave up on the right hand side. So here I'm going to go ahead and weld the left hand side permanent, and it is fitting good and I'm happy with it. So we'll weld it in and then we'll come back to the right side assembly later. So I come back to fitting this right side assembly, and eventually I figure out where it is hitting. It's one of the notches that I had cut out to set on the tube has a high spot in it, and I have to take it back to the saw and just kiss cut it and get the high spot off of it. A little bit more filing, a little bit more cutting. Checking all my measurements, checking squareness every way possible. And I'm finally happy with the results, and I spot welded or tack welded into position. All the tack welds are in place. Go back and check all the measurements, make sure everything is not moved. I'm still happy with the results. And then we clamp it down into position so I can do the final welding.
Okay guys, next major component is welded. You can see here, this is the rear of the car. This section here will be part of the firewall between the cabin and the rear of the car and the engine. Engine sits in this area, mounted on engine mounts. The bottom of the oil pan will be about flush with the bottom of the tubes. Keep the center of gravity as low as possible. The lower rear of the car, lower rear suspension will mount in this area. Still got to add the upper tubes where the upper suspension attaches and a few other small pieces, but we are getting close to joining this component to the first component, which was the cabin area that we saw last week's video.
And that is the end of this week's video. Thank you for joining, and join us again next week when we continue to work on the car.